Welcome to the Indigo Peer Learning session at the Social Outcomes Conference. Thank you so much for joining us. INDIGO is our snappy acronym for the International Network for Data on Impact and Government Outcomes. My name's Eleanor Carter and I'm Research Director at the Government Outcomes Lab, where we see ourselves as supporters and contributors to the INDIGO community. So INDIGO is a community of peers. We're from different countries, different sectors. We all have different policy backgrounds, but we share an interest in sharing data. We want to share data about projects that seek to address complex social problems. Really what brings us together is a belief in better data for better social outcomes. So if that sounds like you, welcome. You're a member of INDIGO. We have a really fantastic group of contributors poised to share their ideas and share their insights today, sharing ideas on open data, data use and data collaboratives. Our agenda is structured in two parts. We have a slide that sets this out. It just explains that in the first portion of the session, we'll be talking about an emerging data collaborative. So this part of the session is a kind of a what is a data collaborative and why might we be interested in that. We'll have a series of short panel sessions of 5 minutes each, talking us through what that might mean. And then in the second half of the session, my co-chair, Corey, will lead us through a section that talks about the Hack and Learn. The Hack and Learn show and tell is something that's been running since Thursday last week. So for those of us who weren't able to join, for those of you who weren't able to join the kickoff last Thursday, the idea of this Hack and Learn event was to bring together policymakers and stakeholders who were involved in projects to improve social outcomes, but who have specific challenges and questions. And we brought them together with coders and data enthusiasts who can answer their questions with data. And the teams were invited to work with the INDIGO database, the INDIGO system and data sets. So Corey will guide us through a show and tell from the Hack and Learn teams, talking us through what they've been up to over the past week and how they've responded to 3 user challenges. The first challenge was visualizing the market for impact bonds and outcomes contracts. The second challenge was connecting payable outcomes to the Sustainable Development Goals. And the third challenge was adopting and testing a social investor and fund manager data prototype with Big Issue Invest. Okay, so that's our structure for the session. As ever, this is a GoLab conference session, so the chat is where it's at. Please post your questions and comments for the panelists in the chat bar and we'll do our best to incorporate those as we move through the session. First off, our panelist is Rory to kick us off. So Rory, over to you for some problem definition around a data collaborative and background on INDIGO.
Thanks very much. I'm going to start with background on INDIGO. So my name is Rory MacDonald. I'm a research associate at the Government Outcomes Lab. I'm a bit of a procurement nerd, and that has led me to become a bit of a data nerd. But I'm really interested in data use. And so when we started thinking about our data, as researchers, we have a use case, but also as a school of government, we're thinking about how do policymakers use data and what would they use data for. And so we had a session earlier in June to sort of define a number of different use cases for a data initiative. And it was this realization that, you know, there are others that want to use data and it is more efficient to use, to collaborate with others in the use of data that really led us to start INDIGO, which is the International Network for Data on Impact and Government Outcomes. And this is a community of peers with a shared interest in data and social outcomes. So we think of INDIGO as having 3 layers. I like pancakes, blueberry pancakes specifically. So I think of it as 3 different pancakes. And we've got community, system, and data. And I'll talk about those in reverse order actually here. I have put up a video that describes this stuff in more detail on our website, and there is a sort of introduction to Indigo webpage, and that's available online now. But can we go to the next slide? We're talking about data. Many of you know us as sort of Impact Bonds projects database. We have upgraded our the back end of that system so that we can do some more analytics and ask questions across projects. We have also started a new data set around prototyping different data definitions. And so you'll see in the future more and more different data sets. But something that would be interesting to you is the data set that we have online now, the Impact Bonds version 2 data set, which is in beta, and that's associated with spreadsheets that you can download and update. If we go to the next slide, please. Our middle pancake, the middle layer, is this idea of system. And when we talk about system, we're thinking about people, processes, and tools. And we're proposing a quarterly collaborative cycle where we are updating our spreadsheets. We're doing research. We're entering the spreadsheets into our new database system. We're displaying those data online in different visualizations, and on a quarterly basis, publishing the data set as a CSV file for your download, along with some commentary. On the third step of this cycle, we're asking project parties to download and update their spreadsheets. So we're really interested in getting updates on new projects, updates that may have happened because, on Impact Bonds, as performance happening, your meeting performance metrics would like those information, and would also like to get clarifications on any issues that we may have got wrong. So on the third layer, that top layer, we're talking about community, and there are lots of opportunities to get involved with the community. We've got our peer learning group that's meeting on the 24th of September. We have a stack of ways to get involved otherwise. We've got a GitHub, we've got Slack, we've got a data definitions improvement tool that's online. We also have a feedback questionnaire that we're asking for your feedback. And of course, we're asking you to share and use data. So there are lots of ways that you can help us improve the quality of the data that we hold as a community. Do the next slide. Oh. So that was my concluding slide, but it was pointed out to me that everybody's got really compressed time, and that they were blaming me because I was designing this session, and asking me to clarify what I was talking about when I was putting this question forward about what is a data collaborative. I'm aware that we are at sort of starting up this initiative, and it's our contribution to what is a strong field. There are other data initiatives around, and we want to contribute and play our part in that. We want to borrow wheels, not try and recreate the wheel. So we're very interested in hearing what other people are doing. We're interested in connecting where we can and creating opportunities to join, both on a sort of community level, but also in the data level. So that's why we framed this question to the others, sort of like, what is it that you're trying to do, and how might we connect with that? So with that, I pass it on to my fellow panelists. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks for setting that out. And also particularly big thanks to Josh. So Josh is our next speaker, who stepped in because unfortunately Chloe Tai, who was advertised to speak, is unwell. So Josh, particular thanks for stepping in at the last minute. We would love to hear a bit from you about your experience at Big Issue Invest. What kind of data projects have you been working on recently?
Great, thanks very much, Elle. And thanks everyone for having me. Really excited to talk about this. We've been working a lot with GoLab on how we've been approaching data in terms of government outcomes. So I'll start off by saying, so nice to meet you all. I'm head of impact with Big Issue Invest. We run an investment fund called the Outcomes Investment Fund, which specifically invests in impact bonds, government outcomes contracts throughout the UK. And when we first approached GoLab for to get some feedback and a chance to discuss with them, the question we were sort of asking is, what are we doing as a social investor, and are we doing it well? Like, are we investing in the right places? How can we help improve ourselves and help share our learning with others? When we first came with a question around joining a data collaborative, our first question was quite small and specific. It was about the kind of almost the economics, the social benefit. And we were figuring out whether or not our rate card pricing, i.e. how much is paid for a social outcome to be achieved, whether or not that was correct. And then what we kind of quickly learned through doing the program with the support of Ruri, Julian, and Elle was there's a much wider question around how can we share the right kind of data with the sector as for us as an investor, first to articulate what we can bring to the table as an investor, but also to sort of help this this market and this sector grow. So I'll kind of quickly say, as I said, what we thought we were going to bring was sharing how we think we support as an investor and how helping to develop and deliver projects can be cost effective. And we thought we were going to help showcase how us as a social investor can provide a particular support function, because obviously if you have a commercial investor supporting an outcome contracts, particularly impact bonds, very different dynamic. And what we quickly learned in terms of data collaboratives was it's very hard to structure your data to share it well and consistently externally, and we really want to do that. So we're very thankful to the GoLab team for working with us on that, and we'll continue to develop that. And we kind of want to support that approach of being transparent as a social investor so that we can share what's gone well for us and what we're learning and what's not gone well. I guess one of the things that we're sort of learning as well is data collaboratives need to be super clear on who owns what information to share it. I think it's fair to say some things that people thought we had, we do not. We're not sort of dragons sitting on hordes of data and just not, jealously not sharing it. But what we have done is sort of being able to say, well, we know we have the information we often have is around contract, financial exchange, and that helps add the question of the kind of efficacy. And Ruri talk about being a geek of procurement. I think that kind of jumps into that. But a lot of the actual social benefit data might sit somewhere else, particularly with the delivery provider. So we learned a lot around how to share that well. And I guess this will go into the challenge group 3. What we want to continue to support is, as BII, we're learning, we want to work in more partnerships. We know this is a complex market and we want to bring other investors and funders in and learn from what's gone well for us and what we need to do better in the future. So we're kind of excited to be here to sort of help grow this market and learn from all of you guys and hopefully build more transparency with the data. So thanks for having us.
Oh, that's great. Thanks so much, Josh. Next up, we have Sue. Sue is a longtime friend of the GoLab and is a former fellow of practice with us. And Sue, I understand that you're doing some work around the Sustainable Development Goals and working with the UN on impact standards. Could you talk to us a little bit about that and if you see any opportunities to collaborate?
Great, thanks for having me, guys. Some people will know me as in my capacity as working on impact bonds, and the standards are somewhat of a departure from that, but obviously lots of linkages across the market. So maybe first off to say the UNDP as a custodian of the SDGs identified the fact that the deployment of capital towards the goals was really insufficient to meet those goals by 2030. And so have, along with other multilateral organizations, set up an initiative called SDG Impact, who have kind of a three-pronged approach to accelerating the deployment of capital, one of which is around impact measurement management. The tool of which is the UNDP SDG Impact Standards. So really the theory of change behind putting these standards out in the market is to encourage standardization, transparency, and assurance of practice. So impact integrity, which leads to market confidence and trust and increased capital allocation. They consider in terms of positioning these standards, because as you'll know, there are multiple frameworks in the market, that they sit between or provide a link between high-level principles, such as the IFC's operating principles for impact management, and performance reporting. So for example, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. There are 3 sets of standards. They have a unified framework, but one applies to bonds. So that's use of proceeds bonds, not social impact bonds. So these are likely listed bonds. The second is private equity funds. And the third is enterprises. So essentially general purpose loans and bonds. They're currently out for public comment. So if you are an investor, you cannot go out and use them currently. But the process is quite rigorous, as when you want to provide a certification alongside a set of standards, you need to go through quite an intensive public participation process to be able to receive that seal. They're not a taxonomy. I think a lot of people consider that the UNDP should put together a taxonomy, but the UNDP pushed back on that, essentially considering, not minimizing the importance, but considering the fact that taxonomies tend to be context and time bound. So they would be evolving over time, taxonomies. Essentially what these sets of standards are doing is enabling organizations to improve their decision-making around impact measurement and management, and to translate intent into action, make more informed decisions. And they embed a feedback loop, so there's continuous improvement. In terms of the standards themselves, they are being refined over time. There are 4 standards. The first is around strategy, so embedding purpose, strategy into your business model, goals, etc. The second is around your management approach, so integrating sustainable development issues into your organizational design and operation. The third around transparency, so disclosing development issues, positive and negative. And the fourth around governance, which is really reinforcing your commitment, not only within the instrument itself, but within the larger organization. So the question is really, how do the standards drive consistency, comparability, which is one of the reasons why, you know, you're setting up this sharing data platform. You're improving the quality and comparability of data. Now, one of the sort of requirements of a certification is that, you know, there would need to be an element of public disclosure around achievements of not only the practice standards, but included in that some of the social environmental outcomes themselves, which form an integral part of, for example, you know, standard 2. How do you choose your metrics, and you know, how do you ensure that your data collection is you know, of high quality, etc. And so, although there, you know, these types of frameworks don't tend to integrate in terms of their reporting into other systems particularly easily, one of the priorities of this particular group was to ensure that there was integration between other principles, standards, taxonomies, etc. And so I do think, and you know, it's a theoretical question at the moment, but I do think there's an opportunity, because of the public disclosure and because of this issue, this opportunity to integrate, that there is an opportunity to be able to include some of this data on a platform like INDIGO. So it'd be great to explore that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sue. I've got lots of questions, but I'll stick to working through our lovely array of speakers, and then we'll have time for questions towards the end of this first part. Next up, we have Claudia. Thanks for joining us again, Claudia. You've already spoken in the past to the INDIGO group, but it would be great if you could give us a sense of the building of the classification system that you've been working on. What's your user case? And do you think there are synergies between your work and INDIGO?
Yes, thank you, Elle. And actually, Susan has given me the perfect leeway, because she actually described a little bit about the current market ecosystem and you know, what we identified as gaps or challenges that practitioners are currently facing who want to invest for impact or with a sustainable background. So to maybe follow on where we are and what we're seeing is, if you are trusting the numbers in the recent book from Sir Ronnie Cohen, that where he described that there are currently over 150 different impact assessment efforts across the world underway. And that obviously leaves practitioners in the investment community with the dilemma as to how can they navigate that breadth of information out there and make consistent determination of impact when looking across investments and across asset classes. So how can they construct and manage portfolios that not only consider revenues and risks, but also with impact and the advancement of global goals such as the SDGs in mind. So we really decided on focusing to build a digital platform, and we are first and foremost a technology initiative, so a data initiative that has built over recent months together with organization, the investment community, and the impact community, if you like, an interactive digital platform, providing a very practical way on how practitioners can start disclosing how they are currently assessing, measuring, and managing impacts of their funds, and then to deliver that information in a streamlined way to investors and asset owners, so they can start better assessing what it is that asset managers are currently doing in that space. So the ultimate goal is really to foster widespread adoption of a streamlined and consistent way, in that asset managers can communicate and describe and use a shared language in which they measure and manage impacts to date. And we're building on the logic of impact classes. Impact classes are a market-agreed logic that was developed through the impact management project by a group of practitioners. So it's something that exists in the market already and has been widely adopted. And we really hope that by doing so, we can provide transparent and hopefully more consistent data, and ultimately share that data with other platforms for the greater good of the market. I think where our effort is a little bit different to other efforts in this field, we are a fully non-commercial offering. So our systems and the data we are collecting is free to use and publicly available. We really want to provide visibility on impacts of investments across asset classes, so for multi-asset class portfolio, and we really hope by driving this consistent approach on classifying, as we call it, impacts, we can provide that visibility. And then I think it's also our approach on practitioner-led innovation. So we're working very closely with asset managers and asset owners when delivering the tool, but importantly also in alignment with other initiatives. So when something comes up, like the SDG standards that Susan has just described, we are looking on identifying on how we can capture some of this information and allow practitioners actually to communicate how they're engaging with such efforts and how they can integrate then this into their assessment. So it's as much about creating clarity on best practices out there and highlighting and showcasing all the great activities that are going on, while collecting and sourcing information for investors and asset owners in a consistent way. The tool itself is live. We have over 30 managers on the platform who are disclosing information already. We're really hoping to scale adoption over time to then ultimately unlock capital that will allow us to advance the SDGs together with the practitioner community and kind of mainstreaming, if you like, a lot of the conversations which I feel are currently happening in forums like this, but still have to reach probably the ecosystem outside of the impact community. From a collaboration, and Rory said community system data, I think that's something that sits very close with us. So our effort really is about collaboration, integration, the system, as well as the data we are collecting with other platforms through APIs, through functionality that allows the export of that information, and ultimately by making it freely accessible, so without any silos and without creating barriers that ultimately limits and hinders capital to find its way for impact.
Great, thanks so much, Claudia. And I know that the conversations are already afoot as to how to do this kind of connectivity to ensure that we're drawing on the same language and that we understand the community that you work with and how that might connect into some of the project level information that's already afoot on the INDIGO platform. Great, thank you. And next up, Ian, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. Rory tells me that you have a wondrous data set on spend data, which makes me very jealous. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you've been working on and any connections that you see between your work and the work of Indigo on impact and government outcomes.
Well, with any luck, I should be making some participants quite happy, because we're very committed to open data and transparency. And we can still, I mean, we passionately believe that you can still be a business and provide products and services for free, effectively. And so we have a sort of a policy where academics such as yourselves and the Go Lab and others use our data entirely for free to further research, because we believe strongly in the possibility that good data can help humanity move forwards and sort of make progress. So let me tell you a little bit about what we've been doing. We've got a very clear and boldly stated aim, which is to gather every piece of public procurement data in the world and to make it freely and openly available to everyone. How we do that is that we have a system of scrapers and other robots sort of roaming around the internet and picking up tender notices and contract notices from countries as diverse as Colombia and Australia, Canada, UK, and beyond, wherever the data is published. And we map and format all of that data into the Open Contracting Data Standard. So it's quite a task. We gather data from over 150 sources in the UK. Worldwide, we're about 780 sources, I think, at the moment. Obviously, some of those go up and down and they change all the time. What that means is that we've got the largest open contracting database in the world. And it also means that we can share and support both governments, suppliers, but also academics and people like Go Lab to really use that data and try and find out what governments are doing. Just earlier this week, we published a piece of research with the Open Contracting Partnership on the value of public procurement data. And we value the government spend with suppliers at $13 trillion a year. So we think that the data can have a positive impact on the way that money is spent. I think traditionally, everyone's worried about how data can sort of prevent corruption happening, and that's been the prime focus for using data. That's certainly true, but if someone's really determined to be corrupt, having a tender portal ain't going to stop you. Where this becomes really interesting is when we link data to other sources. And so, for example, if we're looking at outcomes such as reduction in carbon, there's quite a lot we can do, and we're already projecting carbon from the data we hold on contracts in the UK. So we can say that actually, if you're spending in this way, your likely carbon output from the duration of this contract will be N tons a month. So those are the sort of things that happen when the data gets collated, when it gets aggregated properly, and when it gets shared. And that's what we're committed to doing. And we think that, outcomes and impact investing needs to be part of what governments do in order to drive change. And we want to provide the evidence that shows that different approaches of using procurement can deliver better outcomes. And that might mean lower costs as well, redesigning services. But there we go. So hopefully we'll be able to share data in the future. We can certainly monitor our data, for instance, on the number of tender notices that are coming out globally that mention impact bonds. And we could even input that into your Slack channel. So there we go.
Wow. Ian, that was hugely energizing. I'm beaming from ear to ear. Thank you for that. Oscar, Thank you for joining us again. You're also a kind of long-time friend of the Go Lab and spoke to Indigo last time too. You're hopefully going to give us an example that really uses open data in a very practical way. So I'd love to hear more.
Thanks, Elle. Yeah, and I think the intervention from Ian will also help me kind of like deliver my message in a more effective way. So as Elle mentioned, I'm a senior program manager with the Open Contracting Partnership, or OCP. And what I do is that I basically lead our work, implementation work in Latin America. But the way I approach the problem of data and the problem of outcomes in government spending, it's really informed by my background. So I'm currently with OCP. I used to work with the Harvard Government Performance Lab, which is a social innovation lab embedded in the Harvard Kennedy School, and which is also focused on kind of like improving the outcomes of government spending through social impact funds partly, and also just like by reforming procurement. So what we do in OCP is that we work with government, with civil society, and with businesses to basically implement data-driven reform projects that improve procurement outcomes. And really the focus of our work is improving the results of government contracting, both by using best procurement practices, but then, you know, those practices really need to be informed by timely, high quality, open contracting data. And what I want to do today is to talk to you about how we think about success in open contracting reforms, but also to illustrate it with one example from our work in Latin America. So let me just begin by saying a few words of what I mean with open contracting, although I'm sure, and Ian was also kind of like talking about this, that many of the participants in this call is already familiar with the concept. So at a very high level, open contracting really advances the principles of open government and open data, right? So that means both having, as I was saying, timely and high quality open data, but also giving businesses and civil society a voice that government listens to. So publishing and using data basically enables feedback loops that can transform procurement systems. So as Ian was saying, it's not only about corruption, but it's really about moving away from the compliance culture that rules government contracting to focus on outcomes and contract results. But for this to happen, you really need to have strong multi-stakeholder collaboration, where you're empowering the community with tools to provide the right feedback. So that, on the one hand, enables the market to innovate and to iterate, but on the other hand, also empower civil society to do effective monitoring. So one of the core products that we sponsored at the Open Contracting Partnership is the Open Contracting Data Standard. And the standard really just provides guidance on what should be published and how to publish that data. And it was built to structure the supply of government procurement data, and then it was matched to user demand. So on the one hand, the OCDS is designed to describe the entire procurement process, so not only the tender or the award or the contract itself, but the entire process from planning through delivery, through payment. And we do that by bringing it together with a single identifier, which is the OCID. But basically what that means is that you can easily access join up data across the entire procurement cycle, right? And then understand what's working and what's not working well across that entire cycle. And obviously also join easily that data with other data sets. So let me give you a very quick example of what it looks like in real life to have a successful open contracting reform, right? So we recently published a story about Colombia's data-driven procurement reforms to basically increase competition. So in Colombia, like many other countries, Colombia has struggled with very low levels of competition in public procurement. So you see especially many agencies and many local governments buying most of the things they need, the works, the goods, the works and the services through direct contracts. And some industries have been particularly affected by that, and really important industries for the development of the country. So, for example, in 2015, most public transport infrastructure projects had only one bidder in their tenders. And over the last few years, a slice of the procurement market in Colombia has become more and more competitive. And we argue that that has been basically driven by adopting a much more open approach to the way they do procurement. So just to give you some numbers, in 2019, there was a 17% increase in the average number of bidders among national agencies. There were also more companies just interested in working with the government, increasing the number of tenders by 13%, or 80 or almost 900 new companies who bid for projects that year. And also, most agencies increased the share of the share of processes that only had one bidder, with just like moving with a 4% reduction in total. So what did they do in Colombia? And I think there's like 4 main strategies that we really like, and that I think it's important to highlight here. So the first one, it's important to bear in mind that there was kind of like a public call for change. And this created an environment where transparency and fostering competition was very welcome. So we had protests in the streets of people being really fed up with corruption, and that kind of like helped move reforms that were related to procurement as well. So initially, the government adopted a standard tender documents for public works, and that was driven both by business associations, but also by just like this public call for change that I was mentioning before, to kind of like increase competition in those public works. And now they're implementing similar tender documents for all procurement. So that's been implemented this year. The second one was that there was an effort to adopt at a larger scale the country's e-procurement system. So basically why that matters, it's because all of the data in Colombia is exported to the Open Contracting Data Standard, but it's also published in other open data formats. But that doesn't really secure the quality of the data in and by itself, because the quality of the data is really determined when you collect that data. But as they adopted this e-procurement system, the quality of the data kept improving more and more, and you could actually track competition and improve that. So the third thing they did was that they used that data to actually set out goals and use strategies to create healthy competition among different government agencies by establishing rankings and by actually measuring them and kind of like using all of these strategies that help them or like created the incentives for government agencies to move towards the goal of increasing competition. And fourth, I think like the really important thing here is that this was not limited to efforts by the central government, but also involved a bunch of local initiatives. So in the city of Cali, for example, they really make great efforts to improve vendor communication and capacity building with vendors informed by data practices. In Bogota, they adopted these standard tender documents, not only for public works, but all of their contracts. So okay, with that, I'll end, and I'm happy to talk more about how we do this in not only in Colombia, but in other places during the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Oscar. Sorry for the shortness of time. We've gone for the energizing approach of having an absolutely packed schedule, but that does mean we end up a bit time crunched. Next up, I'd like to invite Lavinia to describe a new project that she mentioned that has launched recently on open impacts. Could you tell us a little bit about that, Lavinia?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon or evening to everyone. I'm Lavinia Pastore. I'm a researcher at the University of Rome, Tor Vergata. And last year, 1 year ago, with some colleagues and other people coming from social enterprise background and also ICT and coder, let's say, background, we decided to fund an innovative startup that is called Open Impact, that is also a research spin-off. So what are we going to do, and why are we here, and why are we interested to the Go Lab and in particular to the INDIGO work? Our idea, of course, came from a research idea. So our interest was mainly about the social impact assessment. So which are the models, how are they done, which are the components, and so on. And investing this issue from an academic point of view, we came up with the idea that maybe the point was not to investigate how many models or which are the components, but to try to grasp which are the main data that actually compose an impact value chain. And so we started the project of Open Impact started as a research project, and then we decided to become a startup. And what are we doing? We are collecting a database that is growing every day, in which we are collecting actually open data from assured report or reports on social impact assessments. And we are creating a database line. So we are trying to simplify this open data that otherwise is not accessible, because every time that you have to do an evaluation, for instance, on a certain topic, you have to start from the beginning and you have to read every time a bunch of other reports, maybe to have an idea of what you are going to need or what you are going to do. Our idea is to use this kind of database not only for evaluation, that is not our first aim, but to start a social impact cycle, let's say. So to use this benchmark to co-design new policy with the public administration or with foundation or investment funds, and at the same time to help social enterprises or enterprises that want to enter this market to have a guidance to use the database to design the impact that they might generate with a project, and then when they are implementing it, to fulfill it in the Open Impact platform. So to update the data, and so the data of monitoring, and at the end, the evaluation data. So this is the main idea, and is related to the database. On the other side, we are also working directly with organizations. Yesterday, I was involved in a session in which I presented our work, for instance, in an Italian region, in which we collect directly data from social enterprises using a digital tool, because Open Impact is also a digital platform in which on one side there is the impact database and the possibility to consult it, and on the other side there is also the part that we call crowded. We want to become crowded, of course. So now we have 250 organizations from a specific region, and this is the other part in which we are collecting data from bottom-up data, but the aim is the same, to use this kind of data to reshape or shape in a different way policies or new projects or the services for the social enterprises or enterprises. So this is what we would like to do, and with what we are doing. Of course, we started 1 year ago, and so we are very interesting also to find new collaborations and to deepen, maybe with more time, what we would like to do, and to find a way of collaborating with all of you.
Thank you, Lavinia. Oh, it's great to hear about the distillation of important impact data from social enterprises. So it'll be great to collaborate and compare notes. Thank you. Our final presenter is Stefan. Thank you so much for finding the time to join us, Stefan. You know all about data collaboratives. Could you help us understand what these things might look like and why the INDIGO community might want to consider the approach of a data collaborative?
Yeah, thanks, Eleanor, and thanks for having me. And I feel like I probably don't have that much to add following this illustrious panel that you already had here in front of me. But I'm Stefan Verhulst. I'm the co-founder of GovLab, which is an action research center. So we are based here in New York and are part of New York University. And the mission is to look into how do we improve and change the way we go about making decisions, leveraging new tools and new technologies. And specifically, we focus into what we believe are two important assets that society has that technology can leverage in new ways. On the one hand, people. So we do a lot of work around collective intelligence, citizen science, citizens engagement, and so on. And the other tool, surprise, surprise, is data. And so here, we've done a lot of work around initially unlocking data through open data initiatives, but the last few years, we focused on what we believe are the new public-private partnerships that are necessary to really tap into the potential of data to change the way we go about making decisions in the public interest, which we have called early on data collaboratives. And so I'm gonna share in the chat, if I can find a way to do so, or perhaps I already done so, chat some of the links to some of our initiatives. But the key element that we've tried to do in the data collaborative space is to both develop a whole range of data collaboratives around critical public needs, but also to learn what are the lessons learned of actually establishing data collaboratives and how can we turn that into new methodologies in doing so. And so we've developed this site, Data Collaboratives, which is probably the largest repository of examples on how data has been used from different actors, including private sector actors, in order to inform public interest decisions. And we also have developed a whole range of data collaboratives, ranging from leveraging mobile phone data in Santiago de Chile to understand urban mobility from a gender perspective, to leveraging Bing search data in order to understand suicide ideation in India among teenagers, and so on and so on. Anyway, the big lesson learned from both developing data collaboratives, but also from understanding the current state of play, is that we really have to make data collaboratives more systematic, sustainable, and responsible if we really want to make data collaboratives part of our toolbox towards social outcomes. Too often, data collaboratives are one-offs, meaning they never scale. Too often, they're always pilots. Too often, there is never really a business case to sustain data collaboratives, and it's seen as a public good, which is great. But as we all know, public goods are very hard to sustain. And too often, of course, there is a lack of trust in data collaboratives. And so we need to really develop data responsibility. And so that's what we've been doing the last few years, is developing a whole range of initiatives that can make data collaboratives more systematic, sustainable, and responsible. And one of the initiatives that we worked on is actually strengthening the demand side for data collaboratives. I mean, I always made the bad joke that it's great to have 100 data sets. What I really would like to have are 100 questions that those data sets could answer. And that would actually really generate the impact that we hope to have from data. And so that's what we are trying to do, is actually source 100 questions across 10 domains that are not yet answered, but could be answered if we find a way to unlock data. And that ranges from migration, gender, to the last domain that we're going to launch with data for Black lives, for instance, is around racial inequality. The other element that we felt is needed is to also nurture the human infrastructure around data collaboration. And so we feel that there is need for a new profession, which we call data stewards, that really can be the translator between the data, the impact, and also understand how to actually build the technical and legal infrastructure needed to make data liquid. And so that's another initiative. And that's also what I would recommend, is actually build a network of data stewards around social outcomes, which is really needed in order to scale data collaboration. Once you have a better demand and once you have a supply that is professionalized, the question then is, of course, how do you match them? And especially, how do you do this in a responsible way? And so here we've also developed a set of initiatives. One, for instance, is around data sharing agreements. I mean, quite often it's great to have all the parties together, and then the lawyers arrive, and then it becomes complicated. And so what we've tried to do is to actually take out the pain of data sharing agreements and developed a template based upon a repository of contracts and data sharing agreements that we have identified. And then also, last but not least, because I don't want to, anyway, just go on a laundry list of being busy, last but not least, we've also really tried to understand on how do you actually also engage citizens in the reuse of data, because ultimately what we're talking about here is really about reusing data to inform decisions that can impact and improve people's lives. And too often what we see is that citizens are never part of the conversation around actually the reuse of data. And so here we've launched a new kind of citizens assembly, which we call data assemblies, which is really a citizens assembly around the reuse of data. And so the link I've shared with you is the link of the current data assembly that we are holding, which is around the reuse of data for COVID-19. So in a nutshell, I think in order to really make data collaboratives systematic, sustainable, and responsible, we do need to strengthen the demand and have a clearer, well-defined demand for certain kinds of data assets. We also need to professionalize the supply so that it's not always hard to identify who actually has the data and how do we engage with the individual that has a mandate to actually unlock the data, if at all. And then how do we do this in a responsible way, ensuring that citizens are not harmed, but also part of the conversation, and especially the agenda setting with regard to how data is being reused. And I think if we can figure this out, then we will have many more data collaboratives that can scale and also can really make an impact on social outcomes.
Great, thank you, Stefan. I think you've done a great job of glass half empty, glass half full in some of the challenges that might exist ahead for us. There's quite an interesting conversation going on in the chat around some of the challenges that we might face. And I think it actually picks up some of the themes and questions from our immediately prior session on data alchemy, where there was a lot of discussion around power dynamics around the sharing of data. Why are we compiling these data sets? Is there always a strong use case? How are the public involved? I wonder if any of our panelists have any comments on the challenges that might be at play here.
Yeah, thanks for this question. I'll defer to others in a second, but it's something that's very much in my mind, the idea of this power dynamics. I think about this on two levels at least. Within a project, we're looking at impact bonds and other cross-sector partnerships. So within a project, there are different partners who have, and the power dynamics there, I think, are very interesting, and I think it's important to think about how information is being shared and who has the information. But there's this other level about sharing publicly. When I think about the public, I mentioned this earlier, I'm thinking about new projects and policy makers in governments around the world who might be sort of thinking about how do I do something, and they want access to information. So, public includes those policymakers who might want to design new projects. And I'm just very conscious that sharing more broadly than just within the project, has an important role in adding public value. And, that's sort of really part of the reason for doing this. But what I haven't really, what I don't quite understand, and what I'm really open to learning, is how one can effectively engage citizens, the service users, the beneficiaries. And so it's really interesting to hear Stefan mention this idea of like a data assembly. I was wondering if others might have seen that work well in other areas.
I probably can't speak to the question around kind of a data assembly, but I did see that Sam's talked to the work that Jen's been leading with the Social Economy Data Lab, and I think just thinking about the power dynamics that we've seen and we've had to be aware of and learn about is twofold, I guess. And I'll focus where we are, which is much more in the micro transaction rather than some of the big picture stuff that's being asked here. It's that one of the first things is that obviously when we talk about open data and data being public and standardized, that often requires resource. Sooner or later, someone has to have put that into a computer onto a website or something which a website can get to, I guess. That's the end of my tech skills, obviously. But to recognize that there is a big demand of resource for that, and particularly for frontline organizations to be asked to do that. So obviously that's one of the reasons why for us as a social investor, we try and think, well, what data can we share, given that our engagement is actually a lot less time consuming than a frontline organization who's delivering data. sorry, who's delivering the services. So I guess that's one thing to point out, is that somewhere in this power relationship within the transaction, is the ask of resource just to actually get this shared. And what I think Sam from the lottery has said with questions around governance of third sector practitioners, I think it's really important that where you have third sector practitioners, that's such a broad spectrum of terms. And what I like what Jen has talked about with us as well has been having not just social investors in there or kind of the big players in, but also having, as Stefan was talking to, individuals like beneficiary members who are actually holding people to account. So it's not just the investors saying this is great data, it's the young people who have been supported into work who are saying, actually, we were happy with the way you asked these questions and we're happy to report this back up, because I don't want to talk about any worries about data sharing and GDPR, but it's also about the right to have your data shared on what your outcomes are. So we do our best to make sure that the people we work with are informed when we're sharing our information. But it's hard work. I'll be blunt, just trying to get the information up. It's really hard work, and working with, I know a lot of our frontline organizations are. So hopefully that helps contribute to that power discussion of recognizing the resource ask of someone who might be less powerful than those. Let's see.
Thanks, Josh. Thank you. We're a little tight on time, so I just want to say thank you again to all of our panelists and all of our contributors. I hope that these are appetizers, the start of conversations that will really continue. It definitely feels like there's a lot that's sort of just beginning or that's really emergent in our thinking, so it's really great to have you contribute. Thank you. Stefan helpfully posed a question around sustainability. I was struck by the wish for 100 questions that data will answer rather than having 100 different data sets. And I think that's a great hook into our Hack and Learn feedback session, which is coming next, because we've been focusing in our Hack and Learn on 3 specific questions or use cases. And Corey, I'd love to hand over to you now to guide us through the show and tell from our Hack and Learn.
Thank you so much, Elle. It's great to be here with you all today. Excuse me, still a little early here in the West. Wonderful to hear from all of our great speakers so far. Thank you for getting this conversation going, and I hope you will keep it going with further questions and comments and links in the chat as we hear from our Hack and Learn groups. So over the past week, we have been very, very busy with participants, hackers, learners from all around the world who've been working to solve address some important challenges, answer some important questions, and consider how we can use data while doing it. So for the past week, these 3 different teams that you've heard about have been hacking away and using their different skills and insights to generate some visualizations that will provide all of us with powerful insights on the work. They've been collaborating from 13 different countries and more than 10 different time zones, which is amazing. The Go Lab has been supporting them all along the way and has provided a Slack channel where they're sharing code, collaborating on visualizations, and having a good time getting to know each other. What we're here to do today is share a quick 5-minute overview of each of the group's projects. And I want to get us moving on to that right away, but also should introduce myself. I was so excited to hear from these groups. I just jumped right in and picked up where we left off last week. But I'm Corey Zarek, and I am one of the project partners out of the Beck Center at Georgetown University. We've been really excited to partner with the Go Lab on the Hack and Learn effort, and to be here with the group over the past week and much before, preparing for this really exciting session and the projects that we'll hear more about in a moment. So let's get to it. We've got about 5 minutes for each of our presentation groups, and then we'll also have some time for questions as well. So again, keep your questions and comments and links and thoughts coming in the chat, and we will turn this into a discussion. So first up, we're going to hear from Juliana Utz, who's been working on the social network analysis.
Great.
Juliana, take it away.
Thank you. Well, hello, everybody. 5 minutes is very few times, so I'm going to start right away. The first graph that we want to show you is this small network. This is how the SIP network of homelessness projects in the US looks like. So if you are looking at the blue circles, you are looking at the SIPs or the projects, and the rest of the circles are the other types of organizations. Each organization is color coded. So if you look at the left side of your screen, you will find that the yellow ones are investors, that the red ones are outcome payers, etc. So the color coding was really useful to understand the role that each organization was playing in the project and in the network as a whole. This project has two types of relations. If you see, each organization is connected to one project, and at the same time, each organization is connected to the other organizations that are playing a part in the same project. That's why each SIP looks like a really huge network in itself. But the main insight from this graph that we want to share with you is that if you look, there are 4 organizations that are playing a central role in these small networks. There are 3 organizations that are yellow. That means that they are social investors. And the other one, this blue one, is an intermediary organization. For these graphs, if we added the name of the organizations to this graph, they would get a bit messy, so we didn't add them. But if you want to know, these yellow organizations were the Corporation for Supportive Housing, the Reinvestment Fund, the Laura and John Arnold Foundation, and the blue one was the Third Sector Capital Partners. So this way of analyzing the network was really useful because it enabled us to understand how the network was working. But of course, there's still much more work and research to be done using this type of analysis and using the database of INDIGO. If we can take a look at our next slide, we will find this graph of the SIP network around the world. It looks very tiny because it was the only way to make it fit in our slide. And I think this graph is great because it shows us something that we were discussing yesterday in the conference during the morning. If you see the light blue dots, that is the UK SIP market, which is really big, and it is followed by the US SIP market, which are the blue circles. And if you take a look at the rest of the world, you will not find big ecosystems, but very small ecosystems that they are just about to start. So you can really see the difference. Some other thing to bear in mind is that this graph was designed to have a color only for countries that have more than 3 projects. If a country had less than 3 projects, they stay in color gray. And this project only takes into account one type of relationship. You see that each organization is related to the project it's working in, and the size of the circles depends on the number of projects the organizations are working in. Again, if you put the names of the organizations in these graphs, they tend to become a bit messy, but if you want to have some examples, if you look at the UK SIP network, the biggest blue circles are organizations such as Social Finance or the Ministry of Housing, Community and Local Government from the UK. So can we go to our next slide, please? We did a lot of graphs, but we decided to share only 2 because 5 minutes is very few, and we want to share some remarks about our work, and we're going to divide them into 2 parts. Our first remarks are related with the opportunities of this type of analysis, which is a social network analysis. We believe, or we concluded, that it is a very useful tool to understand this type of networks, and there is still there is still more research to be done with this type of analysis. For instance, it would be interesting to try different categorizations and different approaches. Let's think of a graph where instead of classifying organizations depending on the number of projects they work in, let's classify organizations depending on the number of service users they have, for example. If we use different types of categorizations, the map, I'm sure it will look very different. And I think that's very interesting to understand. That was just one example. There are lots of other categorizations to try. It could be a geographical differentiation. It could be a difference across policy sectors. There is still much to understand about these networks. And our second remarks about our work are about the opportunities and challenges that we faced with our INDIGO data. For the future, we would like to have data about the links of organizations in a more accessible format, because at the moment, the information is available in the INDIGO database, but it is not in our in the file that we download from the main data, from the main web page of the GoLab. So in the future, it will be very useful to have that organization in a more accessible format. All this work was done with information that was available in the format of a JSON file, and then James was translating it into an Excel file, and he would send it to us, and we would start doing our graphs. So it will be great to have information in a more accessible way. And our second remark is that we still need to do some cleaning up of the data. We found some problems with organizations that were coded as anonymous donors or anonymous investors, which is true, they are part of these networks, but I think we really need to find a way to categorize them or standardize the way we categorize them, so we can understand how anonymous donors or anonymous or groups of investors work in these types or in this type of networks. So I think I reached my limit. I just want to say that we use Fumo, which is a very useful tool that is available for everybody, and you don't need to be a coder to have these kind of graphs. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliana. That was great, and you raise a great point. One of the kind of novel elements of a hack and learn is that you don't have to have hands-on keyboard, hard technical skills to show up and participate. It was really exciting to see all sorts of hackers join the fun over the past week. If you have further questions for Juliana and their team, drop them into the chat. We, as I mentioned, will have time at the end for questions for all of our speakers, but do feel free to drop questions in as we go and they can answer them on the fly. So next we are turning to Ruby Dixon, who's going to share more about the project team that's been working on the Sustainable Development Goals. And we will have Ruby go ahead and take it away.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruby. I am an intern here at the GoLab, and I am one of the people on Hack and Learn Team 2, where we were trying to work on aligning Impact Bond and other INDIGO project outcomes with the SDGs. So for our project, our goal was, like I said, to align the outcomes of these INDIGO projects with the SDGs, with some relevant topics highlighted. And the initial work that we did this week was that we had a spreadsheet based on INDIGO data, which had a bunch of different data fields, including project ID, project name, and importantly, a bunch of outcomes and the metrics that we're trying to use to assess those projects as they are right now. We have 192 projects and about 1,100 outcomes with, of course, 17 SDGs that we can align them with. So we divided up our team across a subset of projects. And then what we did was just manually connected the outcomes to as many SDGs as we could think of that were appropriate. And then we tried to create a sandkey diagram to illustrate those alignments. So just an overview of the SDGs. Obviously, we have these 17 SDGs, which are kind of these larger overarching goals. And then we have, the UN has laid out more specific sub-goals and indicators within those SDGs. We went into that sub-goal indicator list to try to identify the specific things that would probably be more likely to correlate with the outcomes associated with the projects in INDIGO. The spreadsheet that we started out with looks something like this. So it has project ID, the intervention, the target population and sector, and then this last column is the outcome definition. That's basically the outcome that we're looking to match. And then we just added some other columns within this spreadsheet, and we, as we divided them up, just manually assign them to what we personally considered to be the most relevant SDGs. So obviously there is some kind of personal judgment calls going on here, but we did our best to align them as we saw fit. So this is the kind of data that we were able to compile. And we thought that a really good way to show this kind of information would be a Sankey diagram. So on the left, this is an example Sankey diagram. I think this one shows energy flows and like what they ultimately are used for. So it's like a really useful way to show what you start out with and then kind of what those filter into in terms of the volume of things that you ultimately get. So it seems like a useful way to present this information. On the right, you can see the one that we generated with our first pass. I would say we need a little bit more data and probably a few more colors in there, but you get the idea. That's kind of ultimately what we're going for, something that looks closer to the one on the left. But this is what we have so far. So our findings were, again, this is our goal, and we had a really great team. We found that there were a lot of people from other teams that were willing to help us out, and some people that were trying to help us understand how to make these graphs. And ultimately, we assigned alignments to 163 out of 1,100 possible outcomes. And we aligned them with these 7 SDG goals. So those are the ones that seem to be the most represented in the subset of projects that we picked so far. And I think it's a pretty interesting layout of different goals. It seems to make sense with the type of projects that are in Indigo. So I think at least we're on the right track there. And then the further work, I just wanted to highlight that for this, it kind of requires that we generate a few new data fields in Indigo. So if we wanted to scale this up for all the projects, we would definitely want to have more help with manually assigning some of these outcomes. And also, if anyone wants to help out with validating these assignments, I think that would be extremely important. Also, if anyone has any ideas about tools we can use to improve efficiency with those things, or anyone is familiar with, I don't know, any visualization tools that might help us make it more visually appealing, we would really appreciate that as well. So if anyone's interested in helping out with that, please get in touch. And that's it.
All right, well, congratulations. That's exciting work. And indeed, very impressive that you built out another whole other data set in just a week. Y'all have been quite busy. If you have further questions for Ruby and the SDG team, do drop them into the chat, and we will move along to our third project team, which has been focusing on investing solutions. So we will turn it over to Ben Tiplady from the Social Investment Prototype team. Ben, take it away.
Yeah, so hi guys, I'm Ben. I work with Josh at Big Issue Invest. So if I say anything wrong, I'm sure he'll send me a swift email, but I'm sure we'll be fine. So what we came to GoLab with is the idea that we have some data and we would like to input it into the GoLab database, and we would like it to be as painless as possible, because we know that if we can compare our data to the rest of the industry, then we can get some key insights and also make sure that our outcomes contracts, our social impact bonds, can be as effective as possible, because we can say, okay, this is where it worked here and this is where it didn't work. So what we wanted to do is go through the very first thing that your data will be interacting with, which is the spreadsheet that you enter the data in to get it up onto the database. So our priority is to get as much data down as possible from as many different people. And we identified 3 different challenges, and these challenges aren't insurmountable, but they are just interesting in terms of being able to, get the largest amount of data from people all across the world, and that data be accurate as well. So challenge 1, as you can see on the screen, is the user friendliness of the of the Excel file. This was something that a lot of the people in our challenge group identified. Things like just the color scheme that you're met when you get onto the first page of the data input tool, but also things like this, like the hack and learn, of supporting your peers through the process that is, putting together a bunch of data sets. So what we were saying is it would be really useful to have people on Zoom with you at the same time, just to be able to say, okay, right, how do I define this? I'm trying to understand how I approach this. How would you describe that? And then we also thought about the idea of fast and slow data. So the idea of fast and slow data is our spreadsheet, I think it's got like 9 or 10 pages in it, but there are only a few things that would change on a quarterly basis. As Rory said, we wanted a quarterly update cycle of this data. So there are certain things like outcomes that would change on a month or on a quarterly basis, but there are things such as the name of the project that probably wouldn't change throughout the life of the project. So identifying which of those each value is, and then allowing you to take a deep breath and not worry about the things that are slow data. You can enter them once and then forget about them. Whereas understanding that fast data might be something that changes on a more regular basis. And oranges for the next slide, please. Thank you. The second thing that we saw is where we have, particularly on outcomes, and this relates a little bit to what Ruby was saying before, outcomes data is quite difficult to categorize if you take the pure text from what the outcome is. So we'll take the example that we had with a live example from Big Issue, is we had completes 6 months, and with no context, what does complete 6 months mean? So what we decided is actually you need to be able to build in some context there, and so your definition needs to include what the project is, who the project's affecting, and a time span for achieving that outcome. But you can do that through standard categories of outcomes. So it was a 6-month training program for young offenders, getting them into employment. And so you can quite easily standardize those into employment outcomes and training outcomes to make it possible to say, okay, I want to filter it for employment outcomes in any SIB across the world, and then you can compare the Canadian SIB that worked with young offenders to the UK SIB to the one that happened in Ukraine. And then that way you can look at the different solutions, where things have worked, where things haven't worked, and then be able to analyze it on that basis. Next slide, please. And then challenge 3 were just some quick language fixes. And I know Rory talked about the data dictionary tool that he's got on the website. And so there are just different things about, for example, using the language of fundraising. So what you're fundraising for the contract, but actually if you're a provider, quite a lot of our investees are charitable organizations. So when they'd be thinking about fundraising, they'd be thinking about going out with a bucket and shaking it and asking for change. Whereas raising finance has a different, you have a different relationship with that. That's more to do with investors being involved and the cost of that and interest rates and all those sorts of things. That also links into a really interesting thing that one of our members, Ian, talked about, which was about private and public data. So there are things that are commercially sensitive, things that aren't commercially sensitive, but being able to talk with that on a value by value basis means you can be quite confident in the data that you're uploading, that it won't end up somewhere that you don't want it to be. And then the other thing is, as Rory was saying, it's vital to be able to edit the data so that you can ensure the accuracy and the up-to-dateness of the data. Right, next slide, please, because I'm aware that I'm running out of time. So these are some of the data visualizations that we've got at the moment. And as you can see, they don't look, they haven't all got all the data that we would like, but that's why we wanted to take on this challenge. We wanted to take on the challenge of how do we get it as easy as possible to get people's data into the database so that these graphs can look as amazing as possible and they can have the most relevant information. So at the end of it, if we've done our job correctly, we'll have data that's extensive, accurate, and comparable. Right, that's me. Apologies for going over by a minute.
Thanks, Ben. Lots of good stuff there, and some questions are pouring in, and suggestions and thoughts, and that is fantastic. We've got a few minutes set aside for a little bit of discussion, and so let's actually go ahead and get into some of these questions. And let's see, some looks like may have been addressed directly in the chat. Awesome. So let's start with Elle's question. Ben, this one's for you. Elle says she's interested to hear on the group composition. Did everyone know social investment, or did you have to do some translational work to make sure everyone was sort of baselined at the same level?
I think we were quite, oh God, I'm seeing my own face. We did know social investment on a sort of contextual basis, but there are a lot of people who'd had more experience with the provider side, a lot of people who had more experience with the commissioners, and then people from around the world. So that was really interesting just to hear, okay, you don't understand that you hear that specific word or that phrase in a certain way, but actually if I think about who I know, that's how they would interpret what you're saying. Which again, like as a social investor ourselves, we look at things from the investor's point of view. So if I take a very small example, we were saying how much technical assistance was provided. And it was all technical assistance by the investor, because no one else helps a contract happen other than investor from our point of view. But then it was pointed out to us very helpfully, you're not the only people who know, and you're not the only people who can train people up in how a contract's going to work. Actually, a commissioner, an intermediary, a provider will come in and provide technical assistance to a contract. It won't just be the investor.
Thank you. And one more for you, Ben, while you've got the floor. Shirley has a question about free text. She says she's not a coder, but the example Shirley's familiar with is natural language processing of text fields in the electronic health record field space in the US. Could you keep text fields but search keywords? And if I botched that, Shirley, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I don't know enough about how that works on a technical way, but I suppose what we were saying is we wouldn't remove the free text, but we would build something we would build in the categories additional to that, so that you've at least got a bucket to throw things in with your free text. You're not just relying on the free text to hopefully have the right keyword in it.
Super. Any other questions for any of our three groups? Questions for each other? I've actually got a quick one to kind of put you all on the spot. Maybe we'll just run down in order of the presentations. Could you tell us, and some of this came up in your presentations already, but could you tell us what's next? So what's next for this work? Some of it has been off to such a really exciting start, and some of it feels a little bit clear, like where things might go next. But could you just say a word on where you'd like to see this go and what support, if any, you'd be looking for to take it to the next level? Juliana, would you start us?
Yes, well, I think that we would like to try new approaches and new categorizations. If we need something, we need more time to work on this, because you have to structure the data in a very special way to make the graph. But we would really like to try with categorizations through different policy sectors to see if there is one policy sector that behaves very differently from another. And we also had in mind to build the graph for the social network of each region, So we wanted to do the UK region, the US region, Latin America, Asia, etc. So those are our next steps, and I am really looking forward to keep this conversation going in our next peer learning session. So that would be it for hack team number 1.
Thank you. So if you are, and Juliana, I suspect it sounds like you might be interested in others who would want to join the work and kind of jump in with you all. So if folks have ideas or suggestions of how to advance some of the next wave of goals for this first project,
Yes,
get in touch with Juliana.
Of course, and I think that the Slack channels are going to stay alive, so you can still connect with us on our Slack channel.
Perfect. So Slack is the way to go. And if you need help getting connected via Slack, just let our organizing group know. All right, next let's hear from Ruby. So for the SDG team, Project 2, is there anything in particular that you're looking forward to next? Continuing to build out your data visualizations. And is there anything that this community can do to support you?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that our team would want is just further help making the data real. We have, only enough data to have a bit of a proof of concept. And I think that for it to be really useful, we would need some people to help out to fill out the rest of the spreadsheet. I think we have about 10% of it done. So, if we have a few more people helping us out, it would probably only take a couple more weeks to fill it out. And then I think it'd be really useful for a lot of things. On top of that, I think our visualization could use a little bit more pizzazz, but I think the most important thing is the backbone of the data.
Always, always, always. The data is the critical node here. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Ruby. And if you are interested in scrubbing in with Ruby and team, get in touch. They could use some more helpers. And Ben, why don't you round us out? Tell us, is there anything particular that folks in this group can do to support you all, or just let us know where you're headed next?
Yeah, so part of what we'll be doing is sharing a report on our experience. So we produced it in conjunction with GoLab, just of how the learnings that we've taken from this project of putting our data into the database, and also the different things that we found when we came into conflict. Where were the language difficulties? Where did we have to learn about each other and our different priorities? We're also keen to continue developing the data standard with INDIGO and Open Data Services, who've been really, really good. And all of our visualizations were done by them. So thank you very much for that. And as the other leaders have already said, we're very interested in engaging with other people who have this data and who would like to contribute to uploading more data sets or analyzing existing data sets. And yeah, just if you've got data to share, we'd like to see it. and similarly, with the feedback that we've given on the template, there's always more feedback that can happen. It can always be more user friendly. So if anyone's got any feedback with regard to that, that would be really useful.
Super. Okay. Well, I've taken us a bit over time, so let me thank you, Ben, and we'll move us along so we can try and wrap up almost on time. We've got a great slide here that shows you all how you can stay involved. So reiterating a number of things that our colleagues have just shared and ways that you can specifically contact the organizing group and otherwise join up with the work that's happening. So thank you so much for being part of this great endeavor over the past week. It's been wonderful to have so many participants in the Hack and Learn and so many of you to here today to hear and learn about what they've been up to. And we look forward to seeing where all of this work goes. So to close us out today, let's welcome back Eleanor Carter to send us on our way. Thanks so much, Elle.
Thanks, Corey. I really just wanted to say an enormous thank you. Thanks to all of our presenters. It's been so great to have you to learn from your work. Big thanks to the hack teams who in just 1 week are already really forging a new path, showing us how we can use this data. We heard your calls for help and how we can keep this moving, and we definitely want to keep it going. So we'll definitely be doing what we can to support that and keep it alive. Particular thanks to Corey and Alberto from the Beck Centre for helping to facilitate the Hack and Learn, and to James Baster for some support behind the scenes on that. And finally, thanks to everyone for joining this session. I really feel like there's such great energy around the Indigo initiative, and it's a real, just so energizing to be part of this. So please sign up to our mailing list to stay in the loop on things, and we really look forward to seeing you at our next session on the 24th of September. Thanks, everyone.